Joanna Thielen, who is our librarian for the ME department. And we're going to have a workshop on how to read journal articles. So thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you for that intro. Can everybody hear me okay? If for those of you who are on Zoom, can you put in the chat if the audio is okay or not? Got some moderators on Zoom. Okay, so like Natalie said, my name is Joanna Thielen. I'm the librarian for the mechanical engineering department. Has anybody met with me or come to a workshop with me before? Go ahead and raise your hand if you're here in person. Okay, a few of you. So this workshop actually came out of a collaboration with MEGC this summer. So they asked me to do a workshop on how to conduct an effective literature review. And when a lot of people registered for that workshop, I asked them the question, what's the hardest part about doing a literature review? And a lot of people said, reading scholarly articles. They're really dense, they're hard to get through, but it's something I have to do and I don't know how to do it. So that's where this workshop came from. So for those of you on Zoom, so here's kind of an overview. This applies to those of you in person. First thing I want to tell you is that also I have two librarians here with me, Jamie and Lena. They are other engineering librarians. They're kind of moderating the Zoom here today. There are no stupid questions about the library, I promise. If you have this question, somebody else here in this room or on the Zoom has the exact same question, I promise you. This is a judgment-free zone. I am not grading you. Will not tell your PI that you're here or what questions you asked. So feel free to ask any questions, even if you think it's simple, like, what is this DOI acronym I see all the time? We're happy to answer those questions you might have. For those of you on Zoom, feel free to put your questions and comments into the chat throughout. Jamie and Lena are monitoring the chat and they'll interrupt me if there's any questions. For those of you in person, feel free to raise your hand at any time. I'm happy to stop. Don't worry, you're not interrupting me. I want to make sure that this session is as useful to you as possible, so please ask questions. For those of you on Zoom, please keep your mics muted. There will be a Q&A portion at the end where you can unmute if you prefer. And closed captionings are available, and then this is being recorded, so you will get a copy of the recording and the slides afterwards. So don't worry about writing all this stuff down. Okay, so here's an outline of what we're going to do. Before we get started in talking about reading scholarly articles, I'm going to highlight a few of the Library's resources you might want to use as an ME graduate student. We'll go over the answers to the workshop registration form, and then we'll dive into today's topic about reading articles, setting up your reading environment, and then some conclusions. So I just want to highlight a few of the Library's resources, and everything that's shown here today is free for you to use as a graduate or undergraduate student. The big caveat is once you graduate, you lose access to these resources, so utilize them while you are here. So many of you have probably seen this before, but it's the Mechanical Engineering Research Guide that's on the Library website. So this is a guide that I put together for students in the ME department like you, and it kind of has like the best starting points for all sorts of research related to ME. So we've got things like finding articles, finding books, finding standards, those sorts of things. And when you get the slides, the screenshot is a clickable link. So you can go ahead and click that and get access to this guide as well. And for those of you on Zoom, Jamie and Lena are adding these links to the chat. And on that ME research guide, there's also a way that you can schedule an appointment with me. You're welcome to email me as well. My email is in the slides. My email address is also on that research guide that I showed on the previous slide. But you can set up an appointment with me, and this is a way we can have a 1-hour kind of conversation on your research topics. So email is good for quick questions like, I'm hitting a paywall. Can you help me get around the paywall? But other questions like, I need help finding articles on my topic of, let's see, who did I help today? Oh, developing a portable exam table for low-cost resource settings. That is where we'd want to have more of a conversation so I can talk about what research you've done and how can I help you. So this link here, you will be able to schedule an appointment with me online. You basically just select a day and time that works for you. This is synced up to my calendar. And then you'll just have to fill out a web form that basically asks, like, what do you want to talk about? So this is completely online. I am doing these mostly virtually, but I can do it in person if you prefer to meet that way. Just let me know. Also, I'm sorry, this little Zoom thing is covering this up. It's called Proxy Server Bookmarklet. So this is a resource on the library's website where you can actually add a bookmark to your favorite browser's bookmark bar. And if you hit a paywall, it will actually reload things through the library server. So you'll get around that paywall. So I'll actually demonstrate that for you today. I'm sorry, I'll have to move my Zoom. So going to this library's website, I would just scroll down here. Oh, can you? Okay, transcript is now enabled. Let's see. Okay, so here's where you add the bookmark bar. So basically you just click this link and you just drag it up into your bookmarks bar. I don't think it's going to allow me to do that here, but usually if you're on your own computer, it'll allow you to do that. And then this check for library access will now appear on your bookmarks bar. So if you hit something like a paywall, you literally just click that bookmark and it will reload through the library's web server and you'll get around that paywall. So I'll show you what that looks like. Sorry, just let me, there we go. Sorry, I'm just juggling the Zoom around. So for example, if I go to the article on the right, you can see it's an article from the journal Nature. And when I tried to get the PDF, the full text of the article, I actually hit this paywall down here in the bottom left that says buy or rent the article. But once I click that bookmark on the bookmarks bar, it reloads into the image that's on the right. And now you'll see it's no longer asking me to pay for the article. It's actually giving me a link to download the PDF on the left or on the right side. So I don't have to pay for anything because it recognizes me as a library or as a student. Ooh, okay. And another thing you can do that's related is we have a browser extension that you can add to your browser. It's called the Lean Library Browser Extension. And basically, if you go to a website looking for a book, this little extension will pop up and say, hey, did you know we actually had this from Library? So you go to this website, you just click this link and then download the web browser extension. So what it'll look like is, say here you're on Amazon and you're searching for this book, Introduction to Modern Climate Change. When you're searching for it, after about 10-15 seconds, this box will pop up over on the left that's got the Library logo on it. And it will actually say the library has this ebook license. So to get access to that ebook, I would just click this blue button right here, and it would take me to the library's version of this book. So instead of having to buy it for myself, I can access it through the Library. So that can definitely save you time in terms of being able to access our ebooks instantly, and also money because you don't have to pay for it. You can use what we already have through the Library. Okay, any questions on that? No, I'm not hearing any. Okay, so before we dive into the content, I just wanted to go over some of the answers to the workshop registration form. So the first question was, sorry, this Zoom is in the way. I don't know how to make it smaller. Sorry, I'm just seeing if I can make it smaller.
High floating meeting controls.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, so one question I asked was, if your PI gives you 5 journal articles on a new research topic today and asks you to email them a summary of those articles in 2 days, how comfortable are you doing so? And most of you answered somewhat uncomfortable, I'd struggle a lot, or neutral. I could do it, but I could be more efficient. So the reason I asked you this question is to show you that everybody else, or the majority of people who are here, kind of feel the same way that you do. And everybody's looking to be more efficient. Trust me, I teach this topic and I could still be more efficient at reading journal articles. The next question was, what's the most difficult part about reading journal articles? I didn't put everybody's answers in here, but they kind of lumped into these themes, and we'll go over these in just a little bit. So it's a really big thing that people struggle with is just the unfamiliar terminology, jargon, lots of equations. Somebody just wrote math in that box as well. So yeah, journal articles are really, really dense. Authors cram a lot of information into a very small area, so it can be really hard to figure out what they're talking about. Determining what's important or useful, we'll talk about some critical reading skills or critical reading questions you can ask after reading each article to help with that question. Some people said they're really long and it's hard to stay focused. Yeah, there definitely can be really, really long. So there are some strategies that will help you not only stay focused, but kind of break reading into more manageable chunks. People wanted advice on how to keep detailed and organized notes, because you don't not just need to read the article, you need to remember what's in them. You need to be able to summarize it for a literature review. You need to be able to present it at your lab meeting or at journal club. And then finally, some people just said, I'm overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start. And that's perfectly fine. That's why we're here today. And I'll give you some concrete strategies that I think you can put in place today to help you read articles more efficiently. So Science, the scholarly journal, has actually done some pieces on this exact topic of like, how do I read scholarly articles? And this was a survey they actually did of postdocs, graduate students, and professors. And they asked them, do you feel overwhelmed reading journal articles? And here are some of their answers. So it's not just you guys, it's everybody else who feels overwhelmed all the time. Remember, some of these people are professors too. Like, these are your PIs and the people who are teaching your courses. They don't know what they're doing either. So it's important to remember everybody feels the same way as you do, but there are ways you can be better. And then finally, I really like this quote by a PhD scientist who works for the Science magazine or Science journal now. He says, nothing makes you feel stupid quite like reading a scientific journal article. Okay, so getting into more of the content, it's important, this may seem kind of basic, but it's really important to recognize the different portions of a scholarly article and what you'll find in each of those portions, because that's really going to guide the method I'm going to show you of how you want to read these articles. So of course, the abstract is going to be a summary of your article. You want to read that really, really carefully. And if it's not relevant to you, move on. Don't even get the full text. Don't continue to the PDF. The introduction, that should give you an overview of what's in the article, summary of like, so what? Why do I care about this topic? The methodology section, how did they actually do what they did? Results and discussion, what did they actually get and why is it important? Conclusions, reiterating why it's important, talking about limitations as well as future directions. And then the references section of other research that they have cited. And then finally, the supplementary information. So that is sometimes included with journal articles, but sometimes not. So that's kind of a tricky part about reading journal articles is you have to keep your eye out to see if they reference any sort of supplementary information. Because if you read the article and you miss that supplementary information, you're kind of missing half of the article. So it's important to know that, kind of keep your eyes open for that. And then also know that it's usually not attached to the full text of the article. So if you just download the PDF of the article, it's not going to be in there. It's usually a separate PDF. And look for different terms on the journal's website, like SI, supplementary info, supplementary materials, supplementary data. Those are the types of words that journals might be using to describe this. So here's an example, or two examples of supplementary information. So for example, this first one, if I scroll all the way, down, there's a section called electronic supplementary information here. And in this case, it's actually a drone video that you can watch. And this one's an actually very, very entertaining supplementary info. So can anybody tell me what they think happened in this video? Either in person or in the chat? So some researchers were actually trying to take drone video of chimpanzees in the zoo, and the chimpanzee hit the drone down with a stick because it didn't like it. And this was the first report of a chimpanzee using a tool like that against a drone. So they included the drone video as supplementary information as a way of highlighting more of what was done with their research. So that's a really funny and interesting example of supplementary information. Unfortunately, not all of them are as interesting as the chimpanzee video. Here's another one where it's actually a little bit hidden. You have to go underneath, and just above the information introduction, they have this supplementary data section right here, and you can actually see that it's a separate PDF that's got 3 more pages of information and figures. So that's something to just keep an eye out for when you're reading articles and downloading them, that it may not just be the main text of the article. Look for that supplementary information as well. Okay, so we're moving on to concrete tips on how you can read these articles effectively. So the first, and I think the most important tip I can tell you today, is do not read the article from beginning to end. By from beginning to end, I mean starting at the introduction and going all the way through the conclusion. That's actually the least efficient way to read articles, and it's actually the one that's going to waste you a lot of time. So the order in which I suggest reading the articles is listed, or the sections of the article is listed here on the screen. So first start with the title, authors, and the citation, next the abstract. Hopefully you've read those even before you've gotten to the article, but maybe you downloaded the article 2 weeks ago and you need a refresher. That's perfectly fine. Then move on to the introduction and conclusions, those so what sections. Why is this research important? Why should I care? Next, skim the section headings and subheadings, and as well as skimming the figures and the captions. And then finally going to the methods, and then ultimately the results and discussion section. So why do you think I suggest reading the methods, results, and discussion sections at the end, rather than in like their normal place in the middle of the article? Go ahead and enter that into chat, or somebody here can raise their hand.
Excuse me, I have a question.
I'm sorry, if you answered it, could you try and answer it in the chat? I don't think we can hear you very well in the classroom.
Okay, so William says, so you understand how the authors arrive before trying to understand the results.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one really great reason. The other great reason you want to look at the methods, results, and discussion last is those are the densest parts of the article, which means it's going to take you the most amount of time and kind of brain power to get through those sections. So leave those towards the end. Also, after you read each of those sections of the article, stop, kind of pause for a second and think, is this article still relevant to me? A lot of times we're used to just like, a professor says, read chapter 5. We have to do that for class. I have to read it whether I like it or not. But now you really have some agency over your reading. You get to decide what you read and what you don't read, which means you can stop reading at any point if you want to. So for example, we have an article and we read the introduction. We pause before moving on to the conclusion. And we think, is the article still relevant to me? If I answer yes, what do you think I should do? Again, sorry, did someone say it here in person? Yes, keep reading. Very good. But if I answer no, what should I do? Exactly, move on. You can stop reading. Stop reading the article, put it in your no pile, put it in your no folder. You probably want to keep some record of that article so you don't accidentally try to read it again. at some point. But that's what I mean. You have agency over your reading. You can stop at any point. If things aren't relevant to you, unless your PI is like, you need to read this, then you need to read it. But otherwise, if you're like writing a literature review or something, like you can stop if it's not relevant to you anymore. Sometimes the abstract is really promising, but then you get into the main body of the article and you're like, this is not what they promised at all. So you can stop reading. So other tips for reading journal articles, mark up the text. You know, personally, I like to highlight with a yellow highlighter on paper. That's just something that I personally like to do. I know that's my reading style. That's what my brain likes. Maybe you hate highlighting and you like to read on your iPad instead. That's perfectly fine. Figure out what works best for you and just stick with it. But if you like putting sticky notes on things, whether they're digital or paper, that's fine. You know, draw yourself diagrams or sketches or simple models of what's going on to help you kind of understand what's going on. And also, so when you refer back to it, you have those notes as well. You can also try the tactic of reading out loud. This gives your brain time to understand what you're reading with your eyes. It actually slows down your reading rate and gives your brain a little bit more time to process. And then also you're going to need to read these articles multiple times, at least 3 times. Really the first time through is just to kind of get the basics of what are they even talking about. The second time is to kind of get more into the details. And the third time is to really solidify things within your brain. So it's not a one and done type thing where you start at the introduction and through the conclusion. You're going to need to read it multiple times. Also, it's important to know that you don't have to read the whole article in one sitting. That's what's nice about chunking it up into the different sections. Maybe you have a pile of 15 articles you want to read. Maybe for the first day, what you do is you just read the title and the abstract of all of those 15 articles to make sure that they're still relevant to you. And if they're not, put them in the no pile. The next day you come back and you read the introduction and conclusions of those remaining articles. And you can kind of go on, so forth and so forth. You know, what makes sense to your brain? You don't just have to read that article all at one time. Also, discussing the article with different people is really helpful because then it's kind of a higher level of learning. You're not just taking it in, you're actually kind of putting it out as well. So discuss it with your friends, your lab mates, your PI. If you're in a journal club, any of those sorts, that can be really helpful to solidify your learning. And then of course, just keep reading. The more you read, the easier it's going to get, the more you're going to become familiar with the terminology, the equations, the different important research theories or methodologies, that sort of thing. A lot of you mentioned that difficult terminology was the biggest hurdle for you when reading articles, and I really think that's what everybody struggles with. I taught this quite a bit to the senior design at undergraduate level, and I consistently had this one professor kind of pipe up and said, I don't even think the authors understand the terminology they put in their articles sometimes, which I think is kind of true. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen some really poorly written articles out there. So I'd say with difficult terminology, you'll want to stop and look up the definitions of different terms, concepts, methods, theories, all of those. Look those up and write them down. You know, write it on the article, write it in, you know, maybe you have a section in your lab notebook or a special notebook, either electronic or paper. So that you're not just wondering what those terms mean, you actually know what it means. So then the next time it comes up, you're like, oh, I remember that from the previous article. So for example, maybe I'm reading an article that says, this is the first report of thyroid fibroblast cells being isodiametric. Does anybody know what isodiametric means? I had no idea, but I looked it up. Isodiametric means having equal diameters or roughly spherical. Makes sense now, but when I was reading the article, I was like, I don't know what that means. So I think this is a good example of how you can look these things up. And then hopefully now that I looked it up, I wrote it down somewhere, I'll remember it for the next time I see it in a different article. Also, through the library, we have this database called Novel, which is a really powerful database for looking up things like equations You'll actually see on the left-hand side, there's the equation section that's highlighted in orange. You can actually type in the name of different equations, or you can browse to different equations, and it actually tells you all about this specific equation. In the screenshot on the screen right here, if I click the blue open worksheet tab right there, kind of would have popped out like a new tab, and it would actually describe what every single one of those variables in the equation are for both the frequency equation and the wavelength equation in there. So you can actually, what does this actually mean? You don't have to guess at what those variables are anymore. And this is a subscription database we have through the library, so you have access to this. And when you get the slides, you can click the link up at the top. Another stumbling block for many people was the results section. So remember, read this section last. It's going to be the really dense stuff. Also, you want to look at those figures. Remember, that was a part before looking at the results section, was kind of skimming the headings, subheadings, looking at the figures and their captions. So a good tactic is to kind of what's called unpacking each figure. So basically, you want to look at the figure and say, what is this telling me? So in the figure on the right, I would say, what's in the caption? Oftentimes, figure captions have unique information that's not repeated in the text. So it's important to read those captions carefully. So I'd read the caption, then I'd look at things like, what are on the X and Y axes? I have a part A and a part B. Are they on the same scale? What is the color scale telling me? What is that line I see down the middle? Those are just for example, the types of questions I would ask when I'm trying to unpack this particular figure. And there's some questions on the left that might be helpful when you look at figures yourself. Yes. Mm-hmm.
When you reread it, would you still suggest reading in the same order you initially did?
Okay, so the question is, when you reread an article, do I suggest rereading in the same order that I initially did? So I'm actually going to go back to that slide quickly. So I would say yes, reread in this order to start with. Once you feel like you're kind of really understanding the article, then maybe read it from beginning to end, because then you don't have to kind of pause and look up definitions or kind of circle back as much as you did during your first or second read. But maybe on your third or fourth read, you can actually go from beginning to end, or you're just looking at specific segments. Maybe you just need to look at the methodology section as a reminder for what they did, because you're citing it in your lit review or something like that. So once you feel really comfortable with an article, I think you can probably go back to reading from beginning to end, but just not until you feel really comfortable with the content. Okay, Jamie? Okay, thank you. Okay, great question. Keep them coming, please. Okay, another really helpful thing that you can do is, who has heard of review articles before? Okay, a few people. Can anyone tell me the difference between a journal article and a review article? Right, exactly. So a journal article is a report of original experimental research. So they'll have things like the methodology section, the results section. They did something and they're reporting the results on it. A review article is slightly different. It takes journal articles on a specific topic and summarizes them, basically saying, this is the state of research on the specific topic right now. So they often have a really rich references section. But if you are working on a new research topic, review articles can be a great place to start, because they're written at a much broader and kind of more general level than journal articles, which are very, very narrow. So this can be a great way to help you understand, not only get familiar with the terminology, but to kind of understand what's the past of the research, what's the present, and also what's the future of this research topic. So it can get you oriented within kind of that research topic. So this may help you with that terminology, and also ultimately when you go on to journal articles, to understand the results section a little bit better. Okay. All right, any questions on those sections or that section, I should say? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the next section is how do you keep your reading organized? Especially if you're in a grad program, you're probably going to read tens, if not hundreds of different journal articles and review articles throughout your grad program. So that can get really overwhelming. So it's important to try to stay organized and maybe set up something from the beginning. So I actually kind of stumbled across this YouTube video of this PhD student who actually made this really cool Excel spreadsheet for himself. And I linked the YouTube video down here at the bottom. It looks really complicated, but actually it's not. So basically what he did is he made all of these different columns, and each column kind of takes an important part about the article about it. So the first column is the title. The second column is the author, then the year. This particular researcher is studying sports medicine. So these are all sports examples. So, but the next column is like, what sport was this article about? What sort of training were they doing? What sort of method were they using? What sort of age were the people involved in the study? So pulling out those important bits and pieces that you'll need to compare and contrast different articles to. And he basically just used what's called the slicer function in Excel to kind of create all of those heading things up at the top. So basically he can click all of those little things and find an article that's about Olympic weight training for, kids under the age of 18. And that was published in 2000, something like that. But you can just think of it as like, after you're done reading, you're basically just kind of filling out this form for yourself to pull out the most important bits and pieces, and you'll have to figure out what's going to be in the heading row. So what are the important bits and pieces? Obviously everybody will want things like the title of the article, the author's name, maybe even the journal's name, the year it was published. But then the other things are going to be up to you. Like, you're not looking at sports medicine, so you don't care about what sport it was done or what sort of resistance training they were doing, but that's what he's looking at for his research. You can also do it in Google Sheets. This one's a more simple example. Basically, they just put the reference on the left, and then they pulled out the themes that they think are most important and just kind of put X's in those columns to denote those themes, so that when they're writing their literature review, they can easily narrow down to what sort of references do I have that talk about the theme of inspiration, for example. So this one's more of a business type example. And again, this is a YouTube video that you can look at. So these are often called like a research matrix or a literature matrix. If you look it up on YouTube, there's a lot of videos of researchers actually showing how they've set up their literature matrix in either Excel, Google Sheets, or some other software. So here's examples of what do I track? I'm sure you're thinking like, this is cool, but how do I know what to put in my columns? So these are just a wide variety of examples of like, here's all of the things I could brainstorm that might be relevant to what you're looking at in ME. So everything from the year, maybe you're looking at geographic location. You could even copy and paste in their abstract. So then you can use the control find function if you're looking for specific keywords. What methodology are they using? Who are if they're working with people, what sort of demographics were they doing? Was it quantitative, qualitative, main findings, your notes, that sort of thing. And also, sometimes remember, it's not you always, it can sometimes be them. And by them, I mean the article authors. There are some really, really poorly written articles out there. Sometimes the abstract is nothing like what the actual article contains. Sometimes they have really unsupported conclusions. Their results are unreliable. They don't provide nearly enough detail for you to replicate what they've done. So just kind of keep that in mind and really have the mindset of being skeptical to begin with. A lot of times we approach the literature like, oh my gosh, these are the experts in the field. They obviously know what they're talking about and what they're writing in the article. But you actually kind of want to have more of a skeptical or cynical mindset that the article needs to prove its quality to you rather than you just automatically accepting it at face value. So to do that, after you read the article, kind of keep these critical thinking questions in your mind. And these actually come from, I got these from one of the ME professors about these are the types of things, kind of the next level. Once you understand what's going on in the article, which means you probably have to read it multiple times, you know, think about what assumptions are built into it. What is assumed to be true? What assumptions are stated? What is unstated? What sort of biases do the authors bring into the article? Do I have any, what are my own assumptions or biases that are affecting how I read this article as well? So this is something you could also put into your literature matrix, like something we, like in here, you could add a column about assumptions made by an author and biases of the author, those sorts of things. So that's really important as well, to think critically about the articles. So another really important consideration when you're talking about reading journal articles is actually how do you set up your reading environment? Because that's really important for your focus and concentration. So I have a question for you. If you're here in person, feel free to raise your hand or just shout your answer out. If you're on Zoom, please put it in the chat. Which people, animals, devices, places, or things distract you when you're reading? So I'm going to answer for my colleague Jamie over here. I've been on many, many Zoom meetings with Jamie over the past 18 months, and she has a delightful cat named Griffin. But guess where Griffin likes to stand? Right on her keyboard. So Griffin often joins us on Zoom, which is entertaining, but also at the same time when Jamie's trying to get work done, he's kind of a pain in the butt. So does anybody else have things that really distract them when they're reading or trying to do kind of that deep concentration work? Your phone? Yep, that's my distractor, is my phone. Big time. Anybody else?
We got some in the chat saying homework, texts from friends, and my phone.
Yep, in the chat, people said homework, texts from friends, my phone, yeah. So we're not trying to like beat ourselves up over, oh, we're so bad at getting distracted when we're reading or need to concentrate. Everybody has distractors. It's really important to know what your distractors are so that when you actually do need to deeply concentrate, you can set up an environment that minimizes your distractions. So hopefully you can be as successful as possible. So a few concentration tips. We just talked about your distractors. Know what your distractors are. For me, it's my phone. So when I'm at work or even in my home office, I try to put my phone someplace where I can't see it. So I'll either put it in like my purse, I'll put it in a drawer in my home office, because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. That's a strategy that works really well for me. There's also different ways that you can minimize electronic distractions. There's lots of apps available for Mac and Windows that basically block you from going to specific sites for a set amount of time. The two I've listed here, the self-control app and the leech block, I listed those because they're free. A lot of the other apps you have to pay for. But basically, they will prevent you from going into your social media or your email for a set amount of time. So you're kind of like keeping yourself out of those things because you know it will be your distraction. If you're sensitive to the noise that's around you, use headphones or earplugs to minimize that. You know, if there's some sort of music that helps you study, maybe that can be playing in your headphones. Also, self-care is really important because if you're not functioning well physically, you can't function well mentally or emotionally. So take care of yourself by eating well. You know, we ate pizza tonight, so, you know, maybe eat some fruits and veggies when you get home. Sleep and exercise are also really important. And also, when you're sick, please stay home. Other reading tips, I kind of alluded to this previously, is to set yourself an attainable goal. Sitting down to read 10 journal articles from beginning to end in a single day is not attainable at all. But maybe you say you're going to skim the abstract and title of those 10 articles, and then you're kind of going to separate them out into your yes and your no pile. And then the next day you'll come back and read the introduction of the articles that are still in your yes pile. So think about what is achievable for me about how fast I read, how much time do I have? You know, for me, I get distracted a lot if I have a really busy day and I just have a lot on my mind. So I may not be able to read a lot of do deep reading, even if I have an hour break, just because I'm worried about things that are coming up. And that's just my personal style. So try to set yourself attainable goals, you know, even write them down, you know, put a Post-it note somewhere, either digitally or on paper, and then kind of circle back to yourself at the end of the day. Did you meet that goal? Great. Set your goal for the next day. If you didn't, that's okay. Don't need to beat yourself up over it. Think about what went wrong. You know, maybe I just got really busy with email and I was only able to skim the title and abstract of 5 articles. That's okay. Maybe I need to look at my calendar a little bit more critically tomorrow and think that maybe I'll just try and skim those 5 other articles that I didn't get to today. Also, make sure to give yourself plenty of breaks. I kind of just modeled one a few minutes ago, like by giving yourself a texting, social media, email, bathroom break, you know, whatever you need to do, kind of just to get up, move around, do something different with your brain. You know, the caveat, of course, is don't leave your stuff unattended because stuff tends to get stolen. Researchers usually suggest taking a 5 or 10 minute break for every 40 to 50 minutes that you are that you're doing reading or some sort of deep concentration. Also, if you find yourself getting repeatedly distracted, give yourself a longer break. You know, maybe now is just not a good time to do deep reading, and that's okay. Maybe you're just going to do some skimming today and you'll be better in a better mindset to do some deep reading tomorrow. And then finally, you can use a technique that's called temptation bundling. Has anyone heard of this before? You can either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Yep, a few people here. So basically, you bundle something you want to do with something you need to do. So for example, I want to eat chocolate, but I have to read this article. So what you can do is you can eat the chocolate after you read the article. So you kind of bundle those 2 things together. Other things to think about: when do you read best? Are you the most able to concentrate right away in the morning? Are you better in the afternoon? This is kind of like, are you the early bird or the late owl type person? You know, and also if you can, schedule your reading time. It's just important as other meetings or your classwork. So if you see it on your calendar, that might be more of a visual indication of like, oh, this is just as important as all of the other things I'm doing, so I need to treat it just as importantly. Also, where do you read best? Where can you minimize your distractors? Where do you have other sorts of controls around your environment? Is that at your apartment? Is that in your lab space or your office space? Is it in the library on Central Campus or North Campus? Or are there other places in, you know, are there other tucked away spots in the robotics building or in G.G. Brown that you can use that are good study environments for yourself? Also, if you have you can set up the buddy system with a friend. They can be your reading buddy. That's a good way to hold yourself accountable. Just make sure that your buddy actually isn't distracting you, because that could be another distractor. A question we get a lot when we talk about reading journal articles is, what about speed reading? I took a speed reading course, so I don't need to put these techniques into place. I can read an article in 15 minutes and I'm good to go. So there's actually been a ton of research done on speed reading, and it turns out speed reading is basically skimming, or what's called expeditious reading, if you're looking in the scholarly literature. So skimming has its place, but it's not a replacement for that deep reading, especially for your purposes. So skimming is a great technique to use to determine if something is worth spending the time to deep read it, but it is not a replacement for deep reading. You're just not going to have the same level of comprehension and retention that you will with deep reading. Also, think about creating some sort of filing system. You want to be like the examples on the left, not the examples on the right, you know, with tons of binders or tons of things just saved on the desktop. You're going to be downloading and reading tons and tons of articles. So figure out what's something that I can do consistently so that I know where the articles are. I don't have to spend a lot of time searching for them, because that can be just a waste of a lot of time and energy. It doesn't matter if you do it digitally or on paper. Figure out what works best for you, and that's fine. So that leads me nicely into my next point, is you need to create a system that works well for you. So that's either, are you going to read articles on paper or digitally? Just be consistent with what you do, because if you kind of do a mix up, it's going to be like, oh, did I print that article and read it? Or is it in my folder in Google Drive, or where is it? You're going to spend a lot of time wasted doing that. Create a way to track your reading. So if maybe that's different folders within Google Drive or Dropbox, or those different things, like we talked about doing that literature matrix in either Excel or in Google Sheets to kind of pull out the most salient points from all of your articles. Whatever you can do consistently is way more important than complexity. A complex system will easily break down. Consistency is really your best friend. And then finally, what works well for others isn't necessarily what's going to work well for you. And that's perfectly fine, because everybody's brain is different. We all think and work a little bit differently. So if your system works for you, that's all that matters. But don't be afraid to ask other people how they do this sort of stuff. You might be able to learn some other tips that I didn't present today that have really helped them. Talk to your PI about this. Talk about this at Journal Club. This is something that people don't talk about, but it's a really important skill to be successful in graduate school. Okay, any questions on that section? No. Okay, I'm just going to go on to the last section, which is utilizing a citation manager to keep organized. So a question for you, do any of you use a citation manager? And if so, which one do you use and why do you use it? Feel free to answer in the chat. And those of you who are here in person, go ahead and just shout out. Someone uses Mendeley, okay. Anybody else use a citation manager or citation management software? Pardon me? EndNote? Oh, Mendeley, okay. Yep. If you don't use one, have you heard of any of these software before? Mendeley? 2 Mendeley in chat. Okay, great. Oh, Zotero, that's also another citation manager. If you don't use one, you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's perfectly fine. That's why we're here today. So a citation manager is basically a software that allows you to keep things organized. So you can organize those PDFs that you download, any sort of other documents. So maybe you have audio or video files or images. You can kind of think of it as like an electronic filing cabinet for your literature. Some of them allow you to take notes on the PDF directly. So you can put like sticky notes, or you can highlight, or you can do that in Adobe and then upload it. The really useful and time-saving features are that they allow you to format your bibliography, works cited, or references pages automatically. For example, with the software manager Zotero, there's actually a plugin to Google Docs. So as you are writing in Google Docs, you can actually plug into your Zotero library and just do the citations automatically, and it will cite it in the correct format for you, so you don't have to manually type it in, which can be a huge time saver. And then also, many of these softwares allow you to create folders and share it with your collaborators. Kind of like you have those sharing features in Google Drive, it's very similar to that. If you're not sure which citation manager to use, ask around your lab, or especially like what does your PI use? What do your lab mates already use? So that you can use something that they are already using. The most common ones have already been mentioned: Mendeley, EndNote, and the Z up in the upper right is for Zotero. Zotero is completely free. EndNote, you do have to buy a license to, and then Mendeley is a mix. There's a free version and then there's a premium version as well. Through the library, we do have this research guide called Managed Citations with Zotero, Mendeley, and EndNote. And this one basically gives you an overview of these three software, and it will actually give you, there's a comparison chart down at the bottom, both Word and as PDF, that compares those three softwares and their features to help you decide which one you might want to use. And then the tabs on the right, the Zotero, Mendeley, and EndNote tab, those actually link out to separate guides on each of those three software so that you can learn everything from getting started all the way through the advanced features of sharing folders and using the cite while you write features. So if you don't have one of these set up, I would highly, highly suggest doing that, especially to kind of just keep yourself organized so that you know you're like creating this electronic filing location for yourself. So everything you have related to your literature should kind of like live in that one location. Okay, any questions about citation managers? I know they're kind of complicated, but remember when you get the slides, here you'll be able to look at this guide. And then we also have full guides on how to use these features. And then also down here, this contact info in the green, if you scroll down a little bit, there's experts at the library where you can set up an appointment with them, and they will literally sit next to you and walk you through how to use this software so you can get that one-on-one help to use it and use it most efficiently. Okay, I'm gonna go to our key takeaways. So the most important, well, some of the most important things I hope you get out of this is to break your reading into manageable chunks. It's not just sitting down and saying, I'm gonna read these articles from introduction to conclusion, and I'm gonna read 10 of them right now. Be strategic about how you read them. Also, get yourself organized early. So think about using something like a literature matrix. Can you create something in Excel or in Google Sheets for yourself? Get yourself set up using a citation management software. Also remember, the more you read, the easier it's going to become. It's really, really daunting at first because you're unfamiliar with everything in the articles. But the more you read, the more you'll start to see patterns and you'll recognize the terminology. Here's some other resources for you. These are, again, you'll get the slides. The top one is just an overview that actually my colleague Jamie here made. It's a video that's like an 18-minute overview of the library specifically for graduate students. So if you're not familiar with using the UM library, I'd highly suggest watching that video. The second one, how to seriously read a scientific paper. That's the science journal article that I referenced at the beginning of this presentation. And it actually gives perspectives from different graduate students, postdocs, and faculty on how they actually approach their reading and how they approach keeping themselves organized. So you can get a lot of different perspectives and see what works best for you. And then there's this Inside Higher Ed article about organizing your literature spreadsheet style. And that's where I got the inspiration to look at YouTube for videos on like a literature matrix. And I found some really interesting ones. And then this bottom one helps you differentiate, why would you want to use Excel versus Google Sheets? There's lots of other software that can help you to keep these sort of things organized. I just only highlighted Excel and Google Sheets because you have access to those and you're probably familiar with those, but there's other software that's out there that can do something similar. And then finally, my last question for you is, after today's workshop, what is one way that you can commit to changing how you read journal articles? So for those of you on Zoom, feel free to put them in the chat. And for those of you in person, I'd like to hear what you're committing to doing. Otherwise, I'm not going to let you leave. I'm just kidding. I'm not that mean. Brave soul, want to go first? Okay, somebody in chat's going to download Mendeley. Great. What about somebody here in person? Try making a literature matrix, great. Yep, change how you read, or the order you read, and then read in chunks, manageable chunks, great. And one other thing, just one more. Somebody give me one more from here in person. Yep, reading things multiple times. Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. And one last thing I want to highlight is the engineering librarians. We have 3 other workshops that are coming up this fall semester. These are not specific to the ME department. They are specific to the College of Engineering. So the first one at the end of this month is learning how to find funding for your research. So as a graduate student, you might be interested in finding like graduate fellowships, or there's lots and lots of organizations that fund travel to conferences, you know, once that more picks up again post-COVID. So there are some databases through the library that will allow you to identify those funding opportunities so that you can apply for them. The next workshop in November, actually, I will be teaching, which is how to write and implement a data management plan, which is increasingly becoming in a required portion of grant applications. Like you have to write one for NSF applications and NIH applications. So if your PI has any grants from those agencies, they've had to write one. And then finally, we have somebody coming in from the Scholarly Society IEEE to talk about kind of the behind the scenes of the publishing process, to share with you tips and tricks on how you can increase your likelihood of getting published. So this is through a specific publisher, IEEE, but the tips they're going to share are relevant whether you're publishing in those journals or other journals. And the link to register to those is on the bottom. And once you register, you'll get the Zoom link. We're just doing those virtually. So that is all I had. I am happy to answer any sort of questions you might have. My email address, again, is on the slide. So feel free to contact me at any time if you have any questions related to the library. Remember, there are no stupid library questions. We are happy to help.
No, it's possible to implement a reference matrix into Mendeley.
So the question was, is it possible to integrate your literature or research matrix into Mendeley?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you actually use the citation management software, a lot of times there's actually a place where you can put comments or notes. So that's just like a free text box where you can put things in. So you can put your notes in there, but it's not going to be structured like an Excel spreadsheet is, where you're going to have the very structured rows and columns. So there isn't a way to kind of integrate that Excel into Mendeley, but you can use that comments function if you want. And yep, and tags. There's different ways you can tag it with different keywords. So you could do that, like, for example, let me go back. Did I blow past it? Yeah, I did. No, where am I? Oh, here we go. I don't know where things. There we go. So if you're just doing a simple literature matrix like this, where you're just looking at very specific concepts, this is where you could use the tags. So you could just have a tag that's for shared vision, and every reference in Mendeley, you can add that tag. Then you would have a tag for relationships, one for inspiration. So then you can search and quickly find all of the articles that have that concept of inspiration within your Mendeley library. And also, like Jamie said, you can make different folders for different topics, for different authors, and you can share those folders with different people as well. So you can kind of use bits and pieces, but it's not like there's a direct like link or integration between Excel and Mendeley. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, that is all I have. Thank you very much for attending.